Hey, everybody, welcome back to the podcast. Today, we're sitting down with our friend Keith Giles to talk about his brand new book, Sola Mysterium, and it's subtitled Celebrating the Beautiful Uncertainty of Everything. And so, Keith, welcome back to the show. I think this is like your third visit. Like at this point, we start handing out free subs at Subway or something. I don't know.
Yeah, I got to punch my card, right? I get
Exactly.
something.
Exactly.
Awesome.
So, welcome
Well,
back. It's good to have you here.
Glenn, thank you, man. It's so great to be back on your podcast. Thank you. And I'm loving what you've been doing. You and I were talking before we hit record. I think we're on similar journeys at the moment. And yeah, man, love what you're doing.
Awesome. Well, thank you. And that said, let's jump in. This book that you wrote. Where do I even begin? What I will say is this: I've read just about all of your books, with the exception of I think like two in the Jesus series. I don't remember which ones, but I think there's two I missed. But this book, I think, by far, my most humble opinion, and it's my podcast, so my opinion really is the only one that matters. Is I think this is your most important book. Like I feel like this book is not just marking like a point or a shift maybe in your own faith development, but I think what is really a shift in the future of the Christian faith, almost tapping way back into some roots that we've forgotten about. So would you agree? Is this like a big book for you?
Oh, it is a huge book for me. Yes, exactly, Glenn. And thank you for saying that, man. It means a lot. Appreciate it. Because like I felt that way, but then I kind of it's my baby and I put it out there, and I'm hoping other people read it and feel the same way. So yeah, I mean, when I just finished this Jesus On series, a 7-book series, and I'm proud of that. I really am. And that chronicles really my journey through my deconstruction. And I know it's been helpful for a lot of people. Hopefully it continues to be helpful for a lot of people that are just beginning their deconstruction journey and have questions about, hell or penal substitution or the end times or whatever, the different
All the
topics
things.
yeah, all the things.
All the things.
But this book is really for the person who I think it's the most natural progression from out of that series, because it's sort of like, okay, well, after I've answered all these questions and after we've dealt with all these, challenges, now what, and this really is a book for people that have read through those things and wrestled with those questions, and now kind of reaches this sort of like now what kind of place. At least I did, and it's very true to where I am. I wrote this book really just as I was processing my own journey out of deconstruction into what reconstruction might look like, and I was just became convinced, the sort of the thesis of the book, um, you know, theology should be a discussion about what we don't know about God, because that's everything. We don't know, like we act like so many times in theology, we act like we have it all figured out, and certainly when it comes to God. And
I don't know anybody. I don't know anybody that does that, Keith. Certainly, I never done that.
Oh, no one does that, right? But all of our debates, all of our arguments seem to be based on this place of certainty, and we're just really not certain. And I think embracing mystery is really it's the most honest thing, just to be honest, to be just be honest with ourselves that we don't know, and we think and we hope and we believe, but those things are in flux. At least for me, I've changed my mind on so many things over the years.
That's right.
And that has just helped me to recognize I've got to deconstruct my need to be right.
Yep.
And I need to embrace the uncertainty and the mystery, because I think we're always going to be in that place of mystery and uncertainty. And that's good. That's actually okay. It should give you comfort. It shouldn't scare you. It should be like, oh, good.
That's right. That's right. I totally agree. And I think for me, like you said, your book, your other books answer so many of the big questions that a lot of people have. Like for me, deconstruction started with hell. And so you have a book that addresses that whole topic. And for other people, it's the end times or whatever. But each one of those books kind of addresses one of those bigger topics. Then your next book kind of leads you into, the next issue you might be tackling. But this book, to your point, I think really helps kind of set the stage for, okay, I've answered some of these questions. Like I feel I have some answers to the bigger things and the smaller things I'm asking, but like, now what do I do? Like, if I'm not going to be anymore, if I'm not going to hold on to this certainty about, the Bible is infallible and it's inerrant, all these different things, like, what am I going to do now? I think that this book is the stepping stone into that. So let's start with the title, Sola Mysterium. What on
Yes.
earth does this mean? Because when I first picked up the book, having really no idea what it was going to be about, when I saw Sola, I was like, Sola Scriptura. Then I started to like twitch a little bit because that was like a big thing when I was in seminary. And then Mysterium, I don't know why, it made me think of like the Scooby-Doo Mystery Machine. So let's start there. Like, I've read the book, so the fog is lifted a little bit for me. But for our listeners who might be wondering, what does Sola Mysterium mean?
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's great. I wrestled a lot with this title, and I'll just say briefly, the title Sola Mysterium is meant to evoke and maybe provoke a little bit, call back to those solas of Martin Luther's, Sola Scriptura, Sola Fide, these solas of the Protestant Reformation. And so I definitely call back to that and echo that and have that in the back of people's minds. But instead of Sola Scriptura or Sola Fide or Sola Christus, to say Sola Mysterium, I want to say only mystery. Like it really is all about a mystery, right? And but I have to say a little. I want to be very honest, because some people who may know Latin will right away catch the fact that that is incorrect Latin. And when I sent this book out for different people to get reactions, David Bentley Hart, this is exactly. I put this in the book at the beginning of the book. His response was that this was gibberish. that in Latin it doesn't mean what I want it to mean. So again, but that's okay, because I realized, I finally decided, I just want to call it Sola Mysterium, and most of my readers don't speak Latin. So other than David Bentley,
it's my book, right?
It's my book, damn it, and that's what I want to call it.
That's right.
So yeah, he said, it's because you have to the word mysterium, is, I guess, is feminine or something, and so I'm supposed to either say solum mysterium or solo mysterio. I didn't like either one of those. I like Sola Mysterium, so to hell with it. That's what I'm going to call it.
That's right.
But that's what the title is meant to evoke, and I think it will in most people. And then the subtitle, right? Celebrating the beautiful uncertainty of everything, not just theology, because I try to go into the book and point out that it isn't just God or theology that we really should have this humility about and uncertainty about. It's really kind of everything, science, our own, what we see, what we hear, our own memories. So much of it is kind of unreliable and not certain at all.
Yeah.
And so I'm trying to kind of put people back on their heels a little bit and even question what we think we know. You really kind of don't know, and you are not really certain really about anything.
Yeah.
And again, I know that's scary for a lot of people. Some of the readers I'm doing a book promo team at the moment, people reading advanced copies of the book. And one of the guys actually, he was messaging me like every 10 minutes. I'm not joking. And he was saying things like, I'm sweating, I'm crying. I don't know why I'm crying. Is it fear? Is it joy? And I'm hyperventilating. And I'm like, dude, put the book down.
Put the book away.
I don't want to, I'm not insured for this. I don't want to cause you any sort of, existential crisis. That's not my point or my purpose. So some people might not be ready for this. Like I might be pushing them a little too far. I hope not. But I think for a lot of the most reactions that I've gotten are people that are like, yes, this makes sense. This really feels more like where they also feel like they're going, which is moving into this beautiful mystery of God, that God is way bigger than we could ever figure out or define.
That's right.
And that it's not about that. We should be moving away from defining God as if we have God all figured out and in a box or in a book.
Yep.
So yeah, hopefully that's what this book can accomplish on the positive side, is help people become a little more comfortable with mystery.
That's good. Yeah, I think it was Rob Bell who said that, once you have God figured out, you're no longer dealing with God. God's no longer the one you're dealing with, because, how could we possibly understand, an infinite being like God? So I have a lot of things I want to ask you, Keith, and my PDF copy is highlighted. I have all different highlights in there, notes, everything. I'm like, oh my goodness, this interview, where are we going to go? What are we going to do? So I'm going to do my best to kind of contain my questions around certain parts. And then I want to give you kind of at the end, kind of the opportunity to share something maybe that we didn't cover from the book, because like you said, you cover spiritual stuff, you cover science stuff, you bring it all together. So can't possibly cover it all in 40 minutes, but we'll see where we go. Does that sound good?
That sounds awesome. Yeah, let's do
Okay,
it.
cool. So my favorite chapter was chapter 3, and for our listeners, it's called "Deconstructing Our Need to Be Right." And on the
Yeah.
first page, you have of the chapter, you have this really good quote, something really important that I want our listeners to hear. So I'm gonna read it for them, and I have it on my screen. Okay, here it is. In a Christianity where the gospel is about having the right information about God, the greatest heresy is to be wrong. It's also
Mhm.
why it's so easy for us to separate ourselves from people who hold different beliefs than our own, because if they are wrong or if they disagree with us, that means that they're heretical, and that gives us permission to break fellowship with them. Because under these assumptions, our agreement is the basis for our unity, not love. It's that last part that really grabs me. Our agreement is the basis for our unity, not love. So I was wondering if you could talk to us a little bit more about this, maybe expand on it, whatever direction you want to go, because I feel like a lot of our listeners, a lot of the conversations I've been having with people, especially on the side who message me or email me, is that they're in this space where they're being pushed out. They feel like they're being pushed out. They're being outcast. They're being maybe even flat out ghosted by family, friends,
Uh-huh.
old church friends, because they no longer agree or believe the same things as the rest of the tribe. And so where they once thought that like they were united to this group because of it was love and we all love each other, we're all part of the body of Christ, all these things, they now realize that they were more united to that group because of the common belief that they once shared. And now that
Yeah.
that common belief is gone, they're left to kind of feel alone. And it's like almost like people loved them for what they believed because they shared our same belief, as opposed to really loving them for who they are. And that's a devastating thing, I think, to come to realize and to come to understand. So maybe you could speak to us more about that whole idea and this specific part of the book.
Right. Well, yeah, I felt like I needed to start the book a little bit with just pointing that out, just like you said. I mean,
Mhm.
I've been doing these. I started a couple of years ago, about 2.5 years ago. I started this group called Square One, and it runs for 12 weeks. And it just I spend time walking with groups of people, like 15 to 20 people at a time usually, and we just walk through 1 week at a time, different aspects of deconstruction, and we deal with this right off the bat. Actually, we deal with forgiveness because we recognize we've been hurt, and why have we been hurt? Well, we've been rejected. Why were we
Yep.
rejected? Well, because we were part of communities that we thought were based on love, and we're in the family. It's family, right? We use all this language, but then we have this very sad, horrific discovery that oh, that was extremely conditional. We didn't tell you that, right? What you find out is, unfortunately, that as you said, your being welcomed into this faith community is conditional on you agreeing with this statement of faith. And the minute you
Right.
question any of these things, you're out. And so what you just read, the quote you just read, was my realization of why that happens. And I think it's because we've had this really, it's a bad shift. I mean,
Mhm.
it's a shift away from thinking of the gospel as what I think it should be, which is transformation.
Mhm.
And we have now shifted in evangelical Christianity to, we firmly believe that the gospel is about having the right information.
Right.
And as soon as you shift to, being a Christian means you have the right information about God, you answer these questions correctly. Well, then, as I said in the quote, then the greatest heresy is to be wrong about something.
Right.
And then that gives us permission then to say, oh, you're a heretic, or you've left the faith because you disagree with me on one of these points of doctrine, which is, again, it's so arbitrary, it's so self-referential to behave that way. Because when someone says that to you, you're a heretic, right? We talk about this on our podcast, Heretic Happy Hour, all the time. It's nonsensical, because, like, okay, so you call me a heretic because I disagree with you on one of these doctrines that you are convinced, this information is the right information about God and about theology. But you understand, when you're calling me a heretic because I disagree with you on that, the guy down the street thinks you're a heretic because you disagree with his list.
Sure.
And
Sure.
it's so arbitrary. And I mentioned the quote from George Carlin, the comedian, right? He
Mhm.
says, have you ever noticed when you're driving on the freeway, if someone's driving slower than you, they're a moron. And if someone's driving faster than you, they're insane.
Right.
And it's true. But what that points out is how self-referential we are. That perspective basically assumes that whatever I'm doing is correct and normal and true, and I'm not wrong, therefore you must be.
Yeah.
And theologically, we do the same thing, right? If somebody is progressive, they're faster, they're ahead of us on the road. They believe these things that are kind of, out there to us and from our perspective, that guy's insane or a heretic.
Mhm.
And if somebody is behind us, oh, they believe these ancient things, they still do these stupid things that I can't believe why haven't they moved on? Why haven't they progressed, to catch up to where I am?
Yeah.
Well, then those people are morons.
Mhm.
It's the same game. We're playing the same game, and we end up basically saying, without saying it, but in a way we are saying it, I am the standard for all truth in the universe, and I can't be wrong, and therefore I'm going to judge you based on whether you're ahead of, are you ahead of me? Are you behind me? Are you with me? If you're with
Yeah.
me, oh, good, you're good. And this, of course, then leads to tribalism. It leads to this us and them mentality, where you're in or you're out, you're right or you're wrong, you're good or you're bad.
Yeah.
And it's always based on whether or not you're in my circle or not.
That's right.
And we know historically this always leads to bad things. It's the people that are convinced that they're right are the ones that burn the other ones to death, or torture them, or crucify them, or that's why it's dangerous for us to put ourselves in that same space.
Yeah.
To act that way and behave that way, because historically we know it's never worked out for good, and you end up doing more evil and more harm to people than good.
Yeah, and I think to your point, like it's so easy to have that mindset in the more conservative world where many of us came from, the evangelical world, but you can bring it with you to where you are now. You're just fundamentalist, but about different
Right.
ideas, about more progressive
Right.
ideas. I remember for me,
Right.
like it clicked, I don't know, maybe like a year ago. I was having some kind of conversation on Facebook or something with somebody, and a lot of people were chiming in, and it was like a conversation about a very progressive idea, but there are a lot of people in there talking about how it needs to be done and how it needs to be believed. And I thought to myself, like, wait a minute. I came out here into the wilderness to get away from all of these gatekeepers, but there's a lot of these gatekeepers rising up now out here. And I'm like, there has to be like another way. And I think your book, and I mentioned Alexander Shia before we hit record, has done a lot of really invested in me and helping me kind of understand this idea of oneness, that like everything and everyone is welcome to the table. The only person who is not welcome to the table is the one who thinks that they're right and everybody else is wrong, because that person doesn't fit into the conversation. But I can learn from you, you can learn from me, we can all learn from each other, and we can all move forward together. We don't have to see eye to eye in order to move forward with our arms locked together.
Right. And see, now, especially if you've deconstructed, right? If anybody listening to this is, and I'm sure they have, if they're at some stage of deconstruction, then you've already experienced how much it hurts to be rejected because you didn't agree with, the community you were in, right?
Yep.
So don't create new communities or new standards now where you're going to be the one kicking someone out the next, it'll be you doing it to somebody else.
That's right.
And it hurts because it happened to you. So we have to rethink community on one level. So community is not based on agreement. It's based on love. Like I love you. I accept you for who you are. And I don't need you to agree with me. And I don't need to prove that I'm right. And I don't need to prove that you're wrong. I can be, and see, this is the thing too. I think you have to reach a level of confidence, I guess, in where you're at, and saying it's okay to be where I'm at, and that I don't need to defend it. I'm not insecure in that. So then I can entertain. If nothing else, I can just listen to somebody who may not agree with me and say, well, I don't agree with that, but that's okay. The only way we learn is to spend time with people who disagree with us. If I'm in a room of people and they all agree with me and they all nod their head no matter what I say, well, how am I going to grow? Right. So I need to be able to have conversations, to expose myself to people with different ideas than my own, without arguing with them, without rejecting them, pushing them away, and declaring that they're heretics or they're wrong and I'm right. To just say, I can listen to you and say, okay, I don't, but hey, that's interesting. Maybe you tell me something I haven't thought of before. That's all right. But again, I'm not going to reject you based on that. So we have to rethink community, not on agreement. And then again, as I say in that chapter, deconstructing our need to be right. That's really difficult, but I think it's really critical for us to recognize it's not about being right. You know, at the beginning of that chapter, I have this quote from Josh Lawson, which I have worn it out. I think I say it more than Josh does. Josh even told me at some point, just take it for yourself. I just put my name on it, but I'm going to keep giving him credit, where he said, you know, the funny thing about my worldview is no matter how many times it changes, I'm always right. And that's where I think a lot of people are stuck. They're still in that place of, I used to believe this. And at the time when I believed it, I was right. But then I read something and, oh, no, it's this. And now I'm right. And then I defend that and argue that and beat people up for disagreeing with me on that and how stupid you are for believing that. But then, oh, wait a minute. Oh, no, I changed my mind again. And now I'm right. Yep. Well, okay. Hold on a minute. Yes, okay, on one level, every time you change your mind, you're always right. But the opposite is true. You were wrong before, and you're probably wrong about a couple things now and down, and you're going to be wrong in the future. So let's just let go of some of this certainty and let's embrace some humility. And since we know we're probably wrong about things, then stop being so certain, right? Richard Rohr, I use this quote in the book. Richard Rohr says, God doesn't fit into any of our boxes, so let's not waste any time defending our boxes. Yeah. What are we doing? That's what so much of theology is arguing about our boxes. Yeah. And God's not even in that box. Like we think he is. God's not in that box. Yeah. So, I think that's what I'm trying to argue for in the book is I have just found it true for myself. I have so much more peace and so much less anxiety and stress in my life when I can just let go of that and not need to feel like I got to convince people of anything, right?
Yeah, that's really good. I think for me, like one of the most, and I said this to you in our email exchange, that one of the most freeing things for me was when I freed my beliefs from the cage that I had them in, and I really started to be like less concerned with what people thought about me, what people thought about what I believed, and how my faith was growing. And like when I went to a private Christian school, I went to Bible college, I went to seminary, and I felt like like looking back and reflecting, I felt like I put all of my beliefs like in this protective bunker in my heart, and I put it behind lock and key, and I was going to guard it with, the apologetics and, the arguments and the theology. I read all the books, I knew all the answers, but like now I'm in this place where like I've not only have I tossed the key away in the lock, but like I've taken the door off the hinges. Like there's no more door. Like I just kind of let my beliefs about things just kind of come and go as they please, instead of trying to build arguments and map out God and map out theology and have this big blueprint to make sure I can prove my point. When someone asks me a question and be able to protect my beliefs, I just embrace the mystery and like the wonder of it all. Like yesterday, somebody asked me a question on Facebook. It was a very direct question about what I believed about like Jesus and the resurrection and things like that. And I said, to be honest with you, I don't know. I have no idea. Did he raise from the dead? I don't know. But at the end of the day, I feel like it doesn't really affect what I believe, because I believe that resurrection is still possible, because resurrection happens every day when a dead dream comes back to life, when something that you didn't think was going to happen happens. Like, I think that's what resurrection is. And I believe that whether or not Jesus rose from the dead or not, and that kind of blows people's minds sometimes. Some people can't handle that at all because they want to have a definitive answer, but I'm just in this place where I'm embracing that mystery. And I feel like other people might say differently, but I feel like for me, I'm in the season of my life where that's put me closer to God or the divine whatever than I've ever felt before.
Yeah, absolutely. And see, this is the shift I think you and I are both experiencing, where, there was a time when we really thought, because people had convinced us of this, I've been programmed my whole life to believe this, that what I believed about God or Jesus or what was like the stakes were the ultimate, right? If you get this wrong, you're going to roast in hell forever. You're going to lose your salvation. God's going to reject you, whatever. And so, once now I moved away from that, like, that God doesn't reject anybody. God doesn't care about my theology, my doctrines, what I believe. Like so all of that now is off the table. I believe that God is love, as it says in 1 John. God is love, and all who live in love live in God, and God lives in them. Mm-hmm. Christ is all and is in all, it says in Ephesians, right? So I'm not worried about that. I don't believe God is this torturer. He's not angry. He's not wrathful. Okay. So I've moved away from that. So now the stakes have dropped. So I'm not afraid to consider some different things. And I don't feel like I have to get it right in my belief system to, jump over some hurdle so that God will love me or accept me or whatever. So that's one thing, right? But also I've made a shift, and I'm guessing you might have as well. I've made a shift away from, because you talked about like, going to Bible college and seminary and, and having the right answers, right? And I was the same way. I was way into apologetics in college and was all about trying.
Josh McDowell.
Yeah, Norman Geisler.
Oh, okay.
When Skeptics Ask, that I had a hardback book, man, I wore that thing out. And I went to a secular college, and I was a philosophy minor. My favorite thing was raising my hand and asking hard questions and refuting my atheist philosophy professor.
You were that guy.
I was that guy. Yeah, I was that guy. But but you do those things because you have a certain perspective on truth, and you get a lot of your identity from having right answers and all that. But now, so anyway, I made this shift away from believing. I believe now that this is wrong, that this is an illusion. But for the longest time, so much of what I did in my theology was based on the assumption that truth was external to me. Truth was something I needed to find it. I needed to get it. I needed to read that book. Or it was God. God was out there somewhere. I need to get God's attention. Oh God, please, listen to me, hear me. I need to find this thing. And so I was reading this book and studying this thing and trying to get this answer. And it was always something outside of myself. And now I'm realizing that, at least I don't believe that anymore. Now I think that that truth has always been within me, right? Christ abides within me. And as I abide in Christ, Christ abides in me. So the answers, the truth, wisdom, or even God isn't out there somewhere. It's all in here, right? So it's within. I don't need to find it. I need to go search for it. I really need to just kind of be still and know and listen and wait and trust.
That's right.
And when I do that, then it's like, then all those things kind of come to me in a more natural way, and I don't have to strive for it and fight for it or earn it. And it's not something I can lose either. It's not like, I had it and then I lost it, right?
Yeah, that's good. That's actually a perfect segue into my next question, because you talk in this chapter as well, chapter 3, about how truth and wisdom can be found in places outside of the Bible, right? Because growing up, and you probably had the same experience, I was always told, well, truth is in the Bible. You need nothing more, nothing less. That's all you need. But talk about how like books, songs, movies, conversation with friends, other religions, other texts, like there's truth everywhere to be found. And when we loosen our grip on needing to kind of glean truth from that one source, the Bible and the Bible alone, we're able to see truth and see wisdom, I think, in places we were never maybe expected to see it. So I'm curious, in what unexpected and new places, Keith, are you finding some of God's wisdom and God's truth these days? And I know this is going to send us places.
Oh yeah, here we go. This is the point where we cross the line into heresy. I'm going to earn my heretic badge.
Hey, I got the hat on right here. There you go.
Yeah,
the heretic hat. We're ready.
I guess I need one of those. Yeah. So, great question. Many places. I mean, as I say in the book, I've always found inspiration and truth and wisdom and God in poetry and movies. Gosh, I love movies. I love watching a movie and there'll be like some profound line or a scene or a moment. I'm like, that's it. Yes.
Yeah.
But also in I mentioned Black Elk. I just read Black Elk Speaks a few months ago, and man, there's just so much beauty and truth and wisdom in that guy, in that book. I've discovered the Gospel of Thomas. I'm doing a series right now. I'm writing a series called The Inner Circle. It's on my Pathos blog, and it's by subscription, so it's like $5 a month. But every week I'm publishing an article based on one of the sayings of Jesus from the Gospel of Thomas. I'm really loving it. It's going to be a book eventually when I complete that. And but also I was reading. I came across this book called the New Testament. You may know what that is.
Yeah.
Yes. And it includes some of the Nag Hammadi writings, of which Gospel of Thomas is one of them, Gospel of Philip. But there's one I had never heard of before called the Gospel of Truth, which I think scholars think a guy named Valentinus wrote it. And man, I read that thing and I was in parts of it, I was just in tears. I was like, this is so beautiful. And I'm actually kind of angry that this was lost to the Christian church for what, 1200, 1300 something years. It was buried in a jar somewhere.
Mhm.
No one, we may have never discovered it if someone hadn't dug it up in the 1940s. So, when we read that kind of stuff, but even beyond that, like Socrates, I find a lot of beauty and truth in what Socrates said. And I guess for people that are nervous about you and I saying these kind of things, like, what do you mean you find truth? Or I would even say I find Christ in some of these things.
Yeah.
It comes from, I think, a better and a more accurate understanding of everybody's, all of my literalist Christian friends' favorite verse in 2 Timothy 3:16, where supposedly it says all scripture is God breathed. So a few years ago, it came to my attention. I think it was Chuck McKnight, actually, my friend Chuck McKnight pointed it out to me. He said, if you go and look in the Greek for a second, that verse in 2 Timothy, the word there is not the Greek word for scripture. It's the common word for the Greek word for writing, just common writing, any writings, it's graphos. Yeah. And so what it actually says is all of the God-breathed writings are useful for teaching, rebuking, correcting, training in righteousness, so that the servant of God may be thoroughly equipped for every good work. And so when you translate it, and again, I think that is a more accurate translation of that text, because by the way, the word scripture doesn't appear. Let's just be honest. Mm-hmm. In your English translation, it says scripture, but it shouldn't be. In the Greek, the word scripture isn't there. It just says all the God-breathed writings are useful for these things, right? Mm-hmm. And so then I think that opens it up much more to, well, then what are the God-breathed writings? And I would say any writing that is useful for instruction and training in righteousness and as you are growing in your faith journey. And then therefore that could be Buddha or Philip or Thomas or Black Elk or Socrates or, Tree of Life, the movie Tree of Life, which I think is beautiful, or, The Matrix, hell, I don't know. So anything, right? A conversation with a friend over coffee. And this has happened to me many times too, where they will just say something, as we're having a conversation that seems random to them, but it just hits me like, whoa, that right there in this moment was the truth that I needed in that moment. So it redefines inspiration as anything that any vehicle that God wants to use in any way, a song, a poem, a film, a book, a writing, a conversation, it can be anything that communicates profound truth that in that moment that you needed to hear, right? And I have many experiences, and I'm sure you do, and many of our listeners probably could point to situations as well where, man, there was just something that happened, and boom, in that moment it clicked, and it probably wasn't a sermon, it probably wasn't a worship song, maybe it was, but for a lot of people, for a lot of us, we recognize we've had those experiences where it can just be some everyday random kind of thing where we encounter that kind of truth. And I think that's God. I think that's truth.
It's really good. Yeah, I've been getting, as you know, into a lot of the Gnostic stuff too. And I think for me, like, I was always so turned off to it because I was always told or led to believe, whatever, that like these texts were written so far after the Bible. And therefore they couldn't possibly be, true. And, they have an agenda, the agenda is written by these evil people who are trying to throw off the Christians. So I was like, I'm just gonna stay away from that. But then when I started doing my own digging, I'm like, oh, like I just had David Brackey on the other day talking about the Gospel of Judas. He said the Gospel of Judas was written somewhere between 130 and 170. So therefore we're talking like if the Gospel of John was written, let's say like 100, it's not that far after. So like these are ideas that are swimming around in that first and second century. And so these texts, like they mattered to people. The ideas in these books mattered to Christians, and they wrote them down and they put together these stories. And like you said, they got buried, they got destroyed, whatever. But one of the ones for me that I've really been digging through recently is the Gospel of Mary. Have you read that one yet?
Yes, I have. Yes.
Yeah. So there's
I'm hoping that one day we find a more complete copy of it, but because it's frustrating. The things that are missing are very frustrating, like the whole first half of what Jesus says to her.
Right.
But I'd love, hopefully we'll find that one day. But yeah, it's still pretty profound.
Yeah, somebody didn't want us to see that first part.
I think it feels like it was on purpose. Like
it does.
And so she said, right, and then it's gone.
That is gone. But there's one part in that book where, and you talked earlier about how this idea growing up that truth is external, that truth is out there somewhere, I got to go get it. There's just one thing that Jesus says in that book that really captures me. And I think he's talking to the disciples, and he says that you're going to have people tell you that, look for God over there, look for God over
Yes.
here. But the Son of Humanity, I think he calls him Son of Humanity, is within you. And like,
Yes.
that's where you find the truth. And like, I can think of so many instances in my own education, even me being a pastor, like telling people that, you got to come to church to hear the truth. You've got to study your Bible to discover the truth. You've got to pray to discover the truth. You got to read these books to discover the truth. You got to go to Bible study to discover the truth. And it's within me the whole time. It's been within me. And I think that when you take that time to dig inside and to process and to meditate and to be alone with yourself and your heart and your thoughts and your past, so many things come to light that have always been in there, but you've never seen it before. And that's where I'm at right now in my life.
Yeah.
Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, Glenn, I'm in the same boat, man. This is really beautiful. I'm in the same boat. And the thing too that I think though what people have to overcome on that, to accept that idea, right? Again, because I feel like I was kind of programmed my whole life. And a lot of Christians will probably, even as you were talking, we're already hearing those tapes playing in their subconscious.
Yeah.
But all your thoughts are evil all the time, Glenn. The heart is deceitful and wicked above all things. Who can know it? Who can trust it? Right.
Yep.
And again, even those, I don't have time to go into this, but
Sure.
Even those verses that in your English translations will say the heart is deceptively wicked. That was changed. If you go back to like the Septuagint version, it doesn't say the heart is deceptively wicked at all. It just says that it's deep.
Yeah.
And that's not evil or wicked. It's just that it's deep, and it says who can understand it, meaning like it's really deep and profound, and just like God, it's this deep mystery.
That's right.
But anyway, nevertheless, we have still received that programming our whole life that we can't trust ourselves, and it's that self-doubt that everything in me is evil and I'm so sinful. How could I know anything? Then it puts you back in that place, or it keeps you in that place of, well, then I have to just listen to Pastor Bob. He won't lead me astray. Or the Bible will never lead me astray. Now, not the Spirit. Don't listen to the Holy Spirit, because actually, at least in being raised Southern Baptist, it was sort of like, well, no, that's dangerous. If you listen to the Spirit of God, that could, you don't know what you're listening to. It could be the voice of the enemy. So, the Spirit will never contradict what's written in the scriptures. So therefore, you don't need the Spirit. Just read the Bible. And there's so much wrong with that, right? It's like, so you're telling me if the Spirit of the living God who's within me, because Christ says, I abide in you and you abide in me, and my sheep hear my voice. But you're telling me if I hear that voice within me, I should doubt it. I should not trust it. Just listen to Pastor Bob. Just trust him. He won't lead you astray. What? I'm gonna challenge that idea. I don't think that that's true, and I think that actually even goes against what's written. If you want to be a biblicist, well, Jesus kind of contradicts that. So, but so people have to overcome that. They have to feel like they can trust themselves and really believe that no, the Spirit of God was poured out on all flesh. So yes, you are capable. Everyone, young, old, men, women. You don't have to go to seminary. You don't have to have a degree. You don't have to read Greek or Hebrew. You really can have this connection with God that's real and true and profound. And that's something I think that sets people free too, when they can finally let go of that fear of them and mistrust of themselves and trust themselves. But that's not easy to do.
That's right. All right. So there's a lot more things that we could talk about. And all right. How much time do you have?
I have plenty of time, but before you ask me the next question, can I just finish something up that I wanted to respond to
please.
a second ago?
Yeah.
Because when you were talking about the Gospel of Judas and the dating of it, and I felt the same way. I was always told the same way, like don't read the Gospel of these Gnostic Gospels, all the same reasons. But then like I'm loving Gospel of Thomas right now. I'm going through that, and what I realized is that all the arguments used to discredit the Gospel of Thomas, you could use those same arguments to discredit the Gospel of John, because they would say, number one, well, it contains new teaching that doesn't appear in the other Gospels. Yeah, so does John. In fact, John is almost completely unique, and it doesn't mention anything from those other three synoptic gospels. And it's like, well, where did this come from? So that's the first thing. Well, then they will say, well, it was written much, much later than those other gospels. So, it's suspicious. Yeah. So was John. John was pretty late in the game, right? And in fact, as you were saying, the Gospel of Thomas, there are some scholars who would date the Gospel of Thomas to have been written around the time of Mark, or at least prior to John, because there's really good evidence, scholarly evidence, that the Gospel of John was directly refuting or referring to things said in the Gospel of Thomas. So whoever wrote John in the Gospel of John had probably read Thomas and was reacting to it and responding to it. So that's that's the same kind of thing. Like if you would reject Thomas, you'd have to reject John for the same reasons. So it contains new material. It was late in the game, and damn it, I can't remember the third thing. Brain. But anyway, all of those same disagreements and arguments that you would have against Thomas are things that, well, if you're gonna use that as criteria for rejecting this, you'd have to reject John. And for most people, John is their favorite gospel. So there's no reason really to reject Thomas for any of those reasons. I personally lean on the side that I do think that Thomas probably is dated at least to the time of Mark, because it is a sayings gospel. And if it's not the Q document, which they kind of surmise must have existed, which was just a collection of sayings, but it is an example of a type of Q document. In other words, it proves that Q documents existed, which is just collections of sayings of Jesus. There's no doctrine really. There's no story. There's no narrative. There's nothing about the virgin birth, the crucifixion, the resurrection, the second coming, the final judgment. It's really just Jesus said, Jesus said, Jesus said. And yet it's still pretty profound stuff if you understand it. And for the first time I read through Thomas, honestly, I hated it. I thought this is stupid. It's the dumbest thing I've ever read. These are nonsensical sayings. They're not connected to each other. They just sound like someone trying to sound like they're wise. And I just completely rejected it until I read this book that completely decoded it for me. And then it was sort of like the missing key, the missing element to help it make sense to me. And all it was just pointing out that to make sense of the Gospel of Thomas, you have to recognize that every one of those sayings in Thomas is Jesus speaking about non-duality, and that separation is an illusion. And if you read it through that assumption, through that filter, all of a sudden it was like, oh my gosh, not only does it make sense, it makes beautiful, profound sense. And that's why I've been loving the Gospel of Thomas ever since.
Yeah, I think you're right. When you read a text like that through the lens of this is nonsense, you're going to see it one way. But when you read it through the lens of, like you said, it's talking about that non-duality piece, it does bring a lot of the sayings to light. Because I've read through it too, and there's 3/4 of it, even today, it doesn't make much sense to me. I'm like, I don't know what's going on, but I find it fascinating anyway. But then there's other pieces that really come to life, but it comes to life when you read it through that lens. Is that the Duffy book that you're talking about? I think what's the name of that book? Do you remember?
Let me see, it's sitting right here. It's called The Hidden Gospel of Thomas by William G. Duffy.
That's right.
And really, that was the greatest thing. Somebody sent it to me. I didn't buy it. Someone mailed it to me, kind of like look it over, and I was like, whatever. I was traveling. I read it on a plane, and by the time I got to the second chapter, and he just convinced me. It was like he showed me that, oh my gosh, that's really what this is about. And then all of a sudden, I just kept reading, and every page I turned, I was like, this makes sense now, and it's beautiful and exciting. And the beautiful thing is too, it's not like, oh, this is some new strange teaching. Like, no, all of this stuff that's in Thomas is affirmed in the Gospel of John, in Ephesians, in Colossians, in First John. All of these things that made it into the New Testament, that continue to affirm that Christ is all and is in all, and that that we can't be separated from Christ, and all these kind of things. And so it's really exciting. It's just beautiful to see, like, these ideas were capturing the imagination of early Christians in the first and second centuries, and did so for a long time until, of course, I guess it was Athanasius who decided that once he had authority from Constantine, he could decide that these books are in, and that means these books are out, and burn these books. And thankfully somebody decided in Egypt not to burn them, but to bury them in a jar, and we found them.
That's right. So good. All right, Keith, last question for you. Obviously, there's a lot of other things, like I said, we could talk about. You talk about quantum physics in your book and quantum theology. I mean, there's a whole basket of things we could dip into, but what's one thing that you'd want to kind of bring us to a close with that we didn't touch on that you want our listeners to know about from the book? One last topic.
Right. Well, like you said, there's so much. I tried to pack this thing as full as I could with so many cool and fun and interesting ideas.
Yeah.
Like I know we don't have time to get into it, but I just want to say, like, that idea space thing, that whole chapter about idea space, I still find that so fascinating. But I'm just going to tease people with that. The thing I think I would want to leave people with, to me, this is a real key thing, a real key takeaway in the book, is this idea of, once you realize this idea that non-duality, that we are not separated from God or from one another. And when you realize truth is not outside of yourself, but it's actually within you. I hope that what this does, and this idea of embracing mystery, all of this combined, I hope that what this does for people is allow them to finally at least entertain the possibility, if not fully embrace it, the idea that you need to be your own guru. That I don't want anybody to believe anything because Keith said so, or Brian Zahn, or Richard Rohr, or pick your favorite guru or author or thinker or teacher. As much as I love and appreciate all of those people, but to say, I guess I realize it comes down to every one of us needs to have our own relationship, our own real, actual experience and connection with God, the divine, whatever you want to call it. And it can't be borrowed. Like, you shouldn't be borrowing, that from me or Richard Rohr or Brian Zahn or Bono or Oprah or whoever. Because, one day we are all going to die and we're going to pass on the other side of the veil. And you can't bring those guys with you. You can't bring any books with you or podcasts or anything else. It's just you and God in that moment. And the truth is, that's what it is right now. Right. So go ahead and start now figuring out for yourself directly, what is your connection with the divine? What is your relationship with God? How are you dancing with this mystery? And don't allow someone else to do it for you. I don't think we can afford to do that. I think we really do need to begin now discovering really truly for ourselves what is true for us in this moment. And I think hopefully by following down this path of embracing the mystery, we everybody for themselves can figure out, what makes sense right now. And it's going to change. Again, don't let the cement harden. Keep an open hand on these things, but begin now, begin here where you're at, wherever that is, and begin that connection, that relationship with God now. And then just kind of see where it takes you, see where it goes, because it will be a journey, and I think it will be breathtaking. That's
right. Yeah, I think a lot of the people, I think one of the bigger criticisms I've come across in my own journey in this season is that, well, you're just saying anything goes. You're just saying everything is good, and there's nothing gets turned away or whatever, and that's just not a good way to live your life. I'm like, I'm not saying that at all. Like, what I'm saying is that, like you said, like, I am my own guru, and so people don't like to hear that, but I think it's when you come to realize that, like we said earlier, that truth resides within you, the Christ resides within you. There's a voice, a divine spark, a divine breath, whatever, it's in there. And once you start to listen to it, you start to discover different truths that I think that have always been there, but you just haven't been able to recognize them and hear them. And I think one of the reasons why I love the Gnostic text so much, and people ask me a lot, is like, why do you love this stuff so much? And I think half of it's crazy. Sometimes I read something, I don't know, what, this person like on an acid trip? Like, what in the world is going on? This doesn't make any sense to me at all. But what I love about it is that it shows the diversity in the early church. It shows that not everybody thought the same. Not everybody understood things the same. And therefore, like, I feel much more confident to take my step in that line of people and understand things the way I understand them for me. And sometimes Gospel Mary says this, Judas says this, Thomas says this, other things say this. that makes sense. This doesn't make sense. I like this. And I piece it together. And now I have this understanding of God that just really makes sense for me. And that's
Yes.
just such a freeing thing to come to. And you can't force somebody into that. You can't force the listener. You can't say this is what you have to do. You have to come to that realization yourself. And I think once you come to that realization, you drop your guard, you allow yourself to enter these different places, a lot of different chains fall free. That's been my experience.
No, I totally agree with you. Absolutely. Yeah. And because again, it's not about, I mean, as long as we're in heretical territory, I guess, what do I have to
Why
lose?
not?
Because I mean, honestly, there's things that I read in the Gospels, or in not in the Gospels so much, but in Paul, certainly, that I will read. Some of it I love, but some of it I go, no, not so much. Like, I'll just use an example. And by the way, this also bleeds over into a lot of the Gnostic texts too. But Paul, like some of the Gnostic writers, people back then in the first, second centuries, they fully believed in archons. They believed in these basically like angel or angelic spiritual beings that were sort of like governors over certain regions. So there was an angelic archon over Israel. There was or Jerusalem. There was an angelic archon over Rome. There was an angelic archon over Spain or Africa, whatever. And they kind of acted almost independently. Like, in other words, like it wasn't like God was telling them all what to do. They had free will like we do. And some of them were good, some of them were neutral, and some of them were maybe not so good. Maybe they were evil or selfish, and they had power and they could sort of control. So this is what Paul is talking about when he says the principalities and powers of the air, right? And by the way, if you read David Bentley Hart's New Testament, his new translation of the New Testament, in his notes, he'll point those out, how often what Paul is referring to in some of his letters are these archons. In others, he really did believe in these sort of angelic powers and beings. And then you see it creeping in these Gnostic texts as well. And so on the one hand, I could say, absolutely, Paul and whoever wrote Thomas and Philip and Mary and these other texts, they did too. They also believed, and they'll mention these archons and these angelic beings and things like that. But here's the deal. I can acknowledge that Paul believed that and other people believe that, but I don't have to. I can say, I think that's stupid. I don't believe in that. And I don't believe in archons. I think that's a made up thing. I don't think that's real at all. Now, am I saying I'm certain and I know? No, I'm not, but I'm just saying I kind of don't buy into that.
Sure.
And I'm allowed to do that. I can say, well, I know that Paul believed that, but I choose not to. And you can do this with anything. And by the way, I think we all do this. We should anyway. We read something, we hear something, and we determine for ourselves, do I believe that? Do I think that's real and true? And you have permission to decide for yourself. Like, yeah, I do agree with that. I do think that is true. Or yeah, no, I kind of don't. And that's okay. Right. It's not all or nothing. We have the ability to discern these things for ourselves. And I think it's a really good and healthy thing for us to figure that out.
That's so good. Keith, we have overshot 40 minutes. Big time.
It's okay.
Thank you. I'm all right with that. But we got to wrap it up. But thank you so much for taking the time to join me. I really, like I said, I love this book. I think it's one of your most important books. Listeners, go buy it. I'll put it in the show notes. But thank you, Keith. I really appreciate your time.
Glenn, thank you so much. And let's do it again sometime.
Absolutely. And real quick, do you want to point our listeners to any particular aspects of your work online that you'd like them to go visit or invite them to explore?
Yeah, thank you. So my blog is keithgiles.com over on Patheos. I'm a co-host of Heretic Caviar podcast. Matthew DeStefano and I also do the Apostates Anonymous podcast, which is a lot of fun. And I have a solo podcast called Second Cup with Keith. All of those available anywhere you consume podcasts. And my books are on Amazon, Kindle and print and audiobook and all that. And I'm on social media, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. Happy to interact with any of your listeners over there.
Awesome. I love the Heretic Happy Hour and then Apostate. It's like when you move on from heretic, now you're ready to graduate to seminary. Yes. Apostates.
Exactly.
Love
Apostates,
it.
Yes.
Awesome. Well, I'll put the links in the show notes, Keith.
Thanks a lot, Glenn.